Isabel Walker woke before the sun rose, her small room dimly lit by the faint glow of dawn slipping through the thin curtains. She reached for her alarm clock before it could sound, careful not to disturb her ailing mother, Margaret, who slept fitfully in the adjacent room. Isabel's mornings always began like this, with quiet determination, balancing the demands of her modest life. Margaret's health had been failing for years. Arthritis had stolen her mobility, and a recent diagnosis of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease made even breathing a laborious effort. Isabel had taken on the burden of caring for her mother without hesitation, sacrificing her own dreams to ensure Margaret had what she needed. After ensuring her mother's breakfast and medication were ready on the bedside table, Isabel left a handwritten note of encouragement, a small ritual that made Margaret smile, even on her worst days. The Harrington estate was a world away from Isabel's cramped apartment. It loomed on a hill, a sprawling mansion surrounded by meticulously kept gardens and fountains that whispered of wealth and privilege. Isabel's job as a maid there was her lifeline, even if it often felt thankless. Clarissa Gray, the estate's head housekeeper, ruled the staff with an iron fist. Her sharp tongue and constant criticism made every day a trial. Clarissa had taken a particular dislike to Isabel, perhaps because of her quiet competence and unshakable resolve. Isabel's modesty and the care she brought to her work made her stand out among the staff, much to Clarissa's irritation. As Isabel walked the 2 miles to the estate, she thought of the laundry room, her small domain. The endless rhythm of washing, folding, and mending was repetitive, but it was honest work, and Isabel found solace in its order. Her hands might be rough and worn from the constant labor, but her spirit remained resilient. The morning began as usual, with Isabel sorting through an overwhelming pile of linens and garments. The Harringtons hosted lavish parties that left behind a trail of expensive fabric stained with wine, makeup, and whatever excess the wealthy indulged in. Isabel approached each piece with care, determined to restore its original splendor. That day, she found herself lingering over a particular gown, a deep emerald satin creation that shimmered even under the fluorescent light of the laundry room. The design sparked a faint ache in her chest, reminding her of dreams she had long since buried. As a young girl, Isabel had loved sketching dresses and imagining herself as a designer. She had even saved up for night classes once, but life had other plans. "Stop dawdling, Walker." Clarissa's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp as broken glass. Isabel snapped back to reality, muttering an apology. She knew better than to argue. By the time Isabel finished her shift, her muscles ached, and her spirits sagged under the weight of another day. Yet, as she walked back home, the sight of her mother waiting with a warm smile made every hardship worth it. Margaret's voice, though faint, carried strength. "How was your day, dear?" Margaret asked as Isabel helped her to the kitchen table. "It was fine, Mama," Isabel replied, forcing a smile. She didn't want to burden her mother with the truth. The condescending remarks from Clarissa, the heavy workload, or the gnawing worry about how they would afford the next round of medication. That night, as Margaret rested, Isabel sat at the small desk by the window and pulled out an old sketchbook. The pages were yellowed, the edges curled, but the act of drawing brought her a fleeting sense of peace. She traced the lines of a dress she could never afford to wear, letting her imagination weave a story far removed from her own reality. Unbeknownst to Isabel, her life was about to change in ways she could never have anticipated. The struggles she bore so quietly would soon force her into a confrontation with a world far larger and more complicated than she could ever imagine. But for now, in the stillness of her tiny room, she allowed herself a small moment of hope. The following week began like any other for Isabel, but something felt off. Clarissa Gray seemed unusually watchful, her sharp eyes tracking Isabel's every move. Clarissa's presence in the laundry room was rare. She preferred to delegate tasks and issue orders from the comfort of her office. Yet today, she hovered like a storm cloud, her gaze cold and calculating. Isabel focused on her work, carefully sorting a new batch of garments that had arrived from the Harrington family's latest gala. Among the pile was the emerald satin gown she had admired days earlier. It was stained now, the fabric marked by what looked like red wine, a challenging but manageable task for someone with Isabel's skill. Careful with that. Clarissa's voice snapped, startling Isabel as she reached for the gown. That dress is worth more than your monthly wages. Yes, ma'am. Isabel replied softly, lowering her gaze to avoid confrontation. Clarissa lingered for a moment longer before leaving the room. Isabel exhaled, trying to shake off the tension. She knew better than to let Clarissa's words affect her, but the woman's scrutiny had left her uneasy. As the day went on, Isabel focused on restoring the gown. She treated the stain with precision, using gentle detergents and hand-washing techniques to preserve the delicate fabric. By the time she finished, the dress looked as immaculate as the day it was purchased. Isabel hung it carefully on a padded hanger and returned it to its protective garment bag. Later that afternoon, Richard Harrington, the estate's owner, arrived home unexpectedly. A man in his early 50s, Richard was an imposing figure with a commanding presence, yet he rarely interacted with the staff. His arrival created a stir among the household employees, who scrambled to ensure everything was perfect. It was during this flurry of activity that the accusation was made. Clarissa stormed into the main hall, holding the emerald gown aloft. "Mr. Harrington," she called, her voice loud enough to draw everyone's attention. "We have a serious problem." Richard turned, his brow furrowed in irritation. "What is it, Clarissa?" "This dress," she said, her voice dripping with indignation, "was ruined under Isabel's care. Look at the seams, they've been torn, and the fabric is stretched beyond repair. It's unacceptable." Isabel, who had just entered the hall to deliver fresh linens, froze in place. Her heart sank as she saw Clarissa brandishing the gown, now marred by damage Isabel knew she hadn't caused. "That's not true," Isabel said, her voice trembling. "I cleaned the dress carefully, and it was in perfect condition when I returned it to the garment bag. I would never—" Clarissa cut her off. "Are you accusing me of lying? I found this dress exactly as it is now, and you were the last one to handle it." Richard glanced between the two women, his expression unreadable. "Is this true, Isabel? Were you the last person responsible for the dress?" "Yes, sir," Isabel admitted, her voice shaking. "But I didn't do this, I swear," Clarissa interrupted again. "She's clearly trying to cover her tracks. This isn't the first time she's been careless, Mr. Harrington. She's a liability to this household." Richard sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "Clarissa, ensure the damage is documented and send the gown for appraisal. Isabel." He hesitated, his tone tinged with regret. "I have no choice but to let you go. We can't afford this kind of negligence." The words hit Isabel like a physical blow. She felt the sting of humiliation as the other staff looked on, their faces a mix of pity and discomfort. "But Mr. Harrington, I didn't." "This decision is final," Richard said, his voice firm. "You may collect your things and leave immediately." Tears stung Isabel's eyes, but she refused to cry in front of her accuser. Instead, she held her head high, her voice steady as she said, "Before I leave, Mr. Harrington, there's something you need to know. I've kept silent for years, but I won't anymore. I am your daughter." The room fell silent. Even Clarissa, who had been prepared to gloat over her victory, looked momentarily stunned. "What did you say?" Richard's voice was low, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "You heard me," Isabel replied, her voice gaining strength. "Margaret Walker is my mother. She raised me alone after you abandoned her. You may not believe me, but it's the truth." Without waiting for a response, Isabel turned and walked out, her dignity intact even as her world crumbled. She didn't glance back, not even as Richard stood rooted in place, his face pale and his mind racing with the implications of her words. As Isabel stepped into the cool evening air, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on her. She had lost her job, her only source of income, but she had also laid bare a truth that had been buried for too long. Her journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Isabel walked the long road home in a haze of disbelief. The echo of her own words, "I am your daughter," played in her mind on a loop. She had never imagined revealing the truth under such circumstances, much less in a public confrontation with the man who had unknowingly shaped her life. When Isabel arrived home, she found Margaret sitting at the kitchen table, her frail hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Margaret looked up, her face lighting with relief as Isabel entered, but her expression quickly darkened when she noticed Isabel's tear-streaked face. "What happened, Isabel?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling with concern. Isabel sank into the chair opposite her mother, the weight of the day finally catching up to her. I lost my job, she said, her voice breaking. They accused me of ruining a dress I didn't damage. And I told him. Margaret's hands tightened around her cup. Told who? Told him what? Richard Harrington, Isabel said, meeting her mother's gaze. I told him I'm his daughter. For a moment, Margaret was silent, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then, with a shaky breath, she set down her tea and reached for Isabel's hand. I suppose it was only a matter of time, she said quietly. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. Is it true, Mama? Is he really my father? Margaret nodded, her expression pained. Yes, Isabel, he is. I've wanted to tell you for years, but I didn't know how. I didn't want you to carry the burden of his choices. Why didn't he stay? Why didn't he want us? Isabel's voice was raw with emotion. Margaret looked away, her gaze distant. It's a long story, my love. Richard and I were young when we met. He was ambitious, always focused on building his career. When I told him I was pregnant, he panicked. He claimed he wasn't ready for the responsibility and walked away. I never heard from him again. Isabel's heart ached at the pain etched on her mother's face. You deserved better, she whispered. Margaret managed a faint smile. Perhaps, but I had you, and that made everything worthwhile. The next morning, Margaret awoke to the sound of loud, insistent knocking at their door. Isabel, still half asleep, opened it to find Richard Harrington standing on the threshold, his usually composed demeanor replaced with visible unease. Isabel, he said, his voice heavy, I need to speak with you and your mother. May I come in? Isabel hesitated, unsure whether to let him in. But Margaret's voice from the kitchen broke the tension. Let him in, Isabel. It's time we had this conversation. Richard stepped into the modest apartment, his sharp suit looking out of place in the humble surroundings. He glanced around, his gaze lingering on the framed photographs and worn furniture that told the story of a life far removed from his own. Margaret, he began, his voice unsteady. Is it true? Is Isabel my daughter? Margaret nodded, her expression resolute. Yes, Richard, she is. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotions. Richard ran a hand through his hair, his composure slipping further. Why didn't you tell me, he asked, his voice laced with both anger and regret. You made your position clear, Margaret replied calmly. You didn't want the responsibility. I wasn't going to beg you to stay. Richard flinched at her words, the weight of his past choices pressing down on him. I was a fool, he admitted. I thought I was doing the right thing by walking away, but I see now how wrong I was. Margaret, I want to make amends. I want to be a part of Isabel's life. Isabel, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. It's not that simple, she said, her voice firm. You can't just show up and expect to erase years of absence. You don't know me, and I don't know you. Richard's gaze softened as he looked at her. You're right, he said. I can't change the past, but I want to try to make things right moving forward. Please, Isabel, give me a chance to prove myself. Margaret placed a hand on Isabel's arm. You don't have to decide anything right now, Isabel. Take your time. Isabel nodded, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and reluctant hope. We'll see, she said quietly, her tone making it clear that Richard would have to work hard to earn her trust. As Richard left the apartment, he paused at the door. Thank you for hearing me out, he said, looking at both Margaret and Isabel. I'll be in touch. When he was gone, Isabel turned to her mother, her expression conflicted. Do you think he's sincere? She asked. Margaret sighed. I don't know, Isabel, but if he is, maybe this is an opportunity for healing, for both of you. Isabel wasn't ready to forgive, but a small part of her couldn't help wondering if Margaret was right. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new, if she could find the strength to let it be. Richard Harrington couldn't sleep that night. Isabel's words haunted him, each one a reminder of his failures. The look of quiet hurt in her eyes was seared into his memory, and Margaret's calm but cutting honesty left no room for denial. He had abandoned them. Now, decades later, he had an opportunity to make things right, but only if Isabel allowed it. The next morning, Richard stood by his office window, staring out at the sprawling estate that he had built. It was a testament to his success, but for the first time, it felt hollow. He pressed a button on his intercom, summoning his assistant. Mr. Harrington, the assistant said as she entered. "Get me the details of Isabel Walker's dismissal," Richard said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I want to know exactly what happened, and I want it today." The assistant nodded and left the room. Richard sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He wasn't just seeking to mend his relationship with Isabel. He needed to understand what had gone wrong under his roof. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Clarissa Gray was feeling confident. She had successfully rid herself of Isabel, whom she had always viewed as a threat. The younger woman's quiet competence and natural grace had drawn attention from both staff and guests, undermining Clarissa's authority. Removing Isabel had been necessary, at least in her eyes. But her confidence was shaken when Richard summoned her to his office later that day. "Clarissa," Richard began, his tone sharp, "I want a full account of Isabel Walker's dismissal. Start from the beginning." Clarissa hesitated, caught off guard by the directness of his question. "Sir, as I mentioned before, Isabel was responsible for damaging an expensive gown. I had no choice but to report it." "And yet," Richard said, fixing her with a piercing gaze, "when I reviewed the report from the dry cleaners, they noted that the damage wasn't consistent with mishandling. They suggested deliberate sabotage." Clarissa's face paled. "Sir, I don't know anything about that. Isabel was the last person to handle the dress. She must have." "Enough!" Richard's voice rose, his patience snapping. "I've also spoken to other staff members. They've confirmed that you have a history of targeting Isabel, making her work environment hostile. Care to explain that?" Clarissa opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. The truth was unraveling too quickly, and she was losing control of the narrative. "Clarissa," Richard said coldly, "you've been with this household for years, but your behavior is unacceptable. Effective immediately, you're dismissed. Security will escort you off the property." "Mr. Harrington, please," Clarissa began, but Richard silenced her with a raised hand. "Save your excuses," he said. "You've done enough damage. Leave." Clarissa's departure was swift and humiliating. The staff whispered as she was escorted out, her usual air of superiority replaced with a stunned silence. Back in the city, Isabel and Margaret were trying to navigate the uncertainty of their new reality. While Richard's unexpected visit had sparked hope in Margaret, Isabel remained guarded. She focused on updating her resume and searching for a new job, determined not to rely on Richard's promises. But one afternoon, a knock at their door disrupted her plans. When Isabel opened it, she found Richard standing there, holding a folder and a cautious expression. "I know you didn't ask for this," he said, handing her the folder, "but I felt it was necessary." Inside were documents detailing Clarissa's dismissal, as well as an offer of financial support for both Isabel and Margaret. "I've made arrangements for your mother to receive the best medical care," Richard continued. "And I'd like to offer you a position managing a new project I'm working on. It's a community center, a space for education, creativity, and support for those in need." Isabel looked at him skeptically. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I owe you," Richard said simply. "For all the years I wasn't there, for the struggles you've endured because of my mistakes. I don't expect you to forgive me, Isabel, but I want to prove that I can be better." Margaret, who had been listening from the kitchen, stepped forward. "You should think about this, Isabel," she said gently. "It's an opportunity to make a difference, not just for us, but for others." Isabel hesitated. Part of her wanted to reject the offer outright, to shield herself from further disappointment. But another part of her, the part that dreamed of making a meaningful impact, was intrigued. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her tone cautious. Richard nodded, understanding her hesitation. "That's all I ask," he said. "Take your time." As he left, Isabel felt a flicker of hope despite herself. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. That evening, as Margaret rested, Isabel sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. The folder lay open on the table beside her, its contents a reminder of the possibilities ahead. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where things could be different. A future where she wasn't defined by her struggles, but by her resilience and her ability to rise above them. Richard Harrington wasn't a man accustomed to doubt, but as he left Isabel's modest apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that his efforts might never be enough. For decades, he had built walls around himself. Walls made of power, wealth, and prestige. Now, those walls felt suffocating, isolating him from the daughter he hadn't known and the family he had neglected. Determined to show his sincerity, Richard threw himself into the project that had been occupying his thoughts for weeks, the Rosewood Community Center. It had started as a vague idea, a gesture of charity to boost his public image, but now it carried a deeper significance. It was his chance to create something meaningful, something that could bridge the gap between him and Isabel. Meanwhile, Isabel was grappling with her own uncertainties. Days passed, and despite her initial skepticism, she couldn't deny the impact of Richard's offer. Margaret, now receiving treatment at a reputable clinic arranged by Richard, had shown visible improvement. The weight of her illness, which had hung over their lives like a dark cloud, was beginning to lift. "You should consider it, Isabel," Margaret said one evening as they sat together in the small living room. "This community center, if it's what he says it could be an opportunity for you to do something you're passionate about." Isabel frowned. "But what if it's just another way for him to ease his guilt? I don't want to be anyone's charity case." Margaret reached for her daughter's hand, her eyes filled with quiet wisdom. "You're not a charity case. You're his daughter. And maybe, just maybe, this is his way of trying to make amends. You don't have to forgive him right away, but don't let your pride stop you from exploring what this could mean for you and for others." The following week, Isabel found herself standing in front of a construction site in the heart of the city. The future Rosewood Community Center was taking shape, a sprawling building designed to house classrooms, workshops, and recreational spaces for underprivileged families. Richard was there, dressed casually for once, his usual air of authority softened by genuine enthusiasm. He greeted Isabel with a smile that held a mix of hope and nervousness. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I'm just here to see what this is about," Isabel replied, crossing her arms defensively. Richard nodded, leading her through the site. As they walked, he explained his vision for the center, a place where children could access education and extracurricular activities, where families could receive support, and where aspiring entrepreneurs could attend workshops and mentorship programs. "This isn't just about giving back," Richard said. "It's about creating opportunities for people who've been overlooked, people like you and your mother who deserve better." As they toured the site, Isabel began to see the potential of the project. The classrooms were spacious and bright, the recreational areas thoughtfully designed. It was clear that Richard had invested both time and resources into ensuring the center would make a meaningful impact. "You mentioned before that you studied business management," Richard said, as they reached the future administrative wing. "I'd like you to oversee the day-to-day operations of the center. You'll have a team to support you, of course, but I believe you have the skills and the heart to make this place successful." Isabel hesitated, the offer both tempting and daunting. "Why me?" she asked. "You could hire someone with more experience." "Because you understand what it's like to struggle," Richard replied. "You've lived it, and that perspective is invaluable." Over the next few weeks, Isabel began to involve herself in the Rosewood project, albeit cautiously. She spent hours reviewing the plans, meeting with contractors and community leaders, and familiarizing herself with the logistics of running such a large-scale operation. To her surprise, she found herself enjoying the work. It was challenging but fulfilling, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose beyond merely surviving. Richard, for his part, kept his distance, respecting her need for space. But his quiet support was ever present, whether through thoughtful gestures like sending resources for the project or arranging for Margaret to visit the site and see Isabel's progress. One afternoon, as Isabel was finalizing plans for an upcoming community outreach event, Margaret arrived at the center with a familiar warmth in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Isabel," Margaret said as she embraced her daughter. "You've turned this into something remarkable." Isabel smiled, though her emotions were a mix of pride and vulnerability. "It's not just me, Mama. This wouldn't be possible without." She trailed off, unwilling to give Richard too much credit. Margaret gently squeezed her hand. "It's okay to acknowledge his efforts, Isabel. He's trying, in his own way." That evening, as Isabel walked through the nearly completed center, She found Richard in one of the classrooms, inspecting the desks. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than usual. Richard looked up, surprised but pleased to see her. "Hey." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Isabel took a deep breath. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, "for helping with Mama's treatment and for giving me a chance to be part of this project. It means more than I expected." Richard's expression softened, and he nodded. "Thank you for giving me a chance, Isabel. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to proving myself, to you and to your mother." As Isabel left the center that night, she felt something shift within her. The walls she had built around her heart weren't gone, but they were beginning to crack. And for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the father she had resented for so long could become the ally she never knew she needed. The Rosewood Community Center was steadily becoming a reality, and with each passing day, Isabel found herself more deeply invested in its success. Though she had initially approached the project with reluctance, she now felt a genuine connection to its purpose. For the first time in years, she wasn't just working to survive. She was building something that mattered. One afternoon, as Isabel reviewed blueprints in her modest office within the nearly completed center, Richard appeared at the door. He held a box wrapped in brown paper and wore a tentative smile. "I was going through some old things at home and thought you might like this," he said, setting the box on her desk. Curious, Isabel opened it. Inside were bolts of fabric in vibrant colors and intricate patterns, along with a set of sketch pads and pencils. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "These were... Mama and I used to dream about things like this," she murmured, her fingers grazing the fabric. "I know," Richard said softly. "Your mother told me about your passion for fashion design. I thought maybe it was time you had the resources to explore that dream again." Isabel looked up at him, her emotions conflicted. For so long, she had buried her creative aspirations, focusing instead on the relentless demands of daily life. Seeing the tools to reignite that dream left her feeling vulnerable, but also deeply touched. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Over the following weeks, Richard began spending more time at the community center, not as an overseer, but as an active participant. He attended meetings with local leaders, reviewed progress with Isabel, and even helped with the smaller mundane tasks like assembling furniture for the classrooms. The staff and volunteers noticed the change in him. Richard Harrington, once known for his aloof demeanor, now seemed approachable, human even. For Isabel, this transformation was both confusing and comforting. She couldn't deny that Richard's efforts were genuine, but the scars of his absence still lingered. Yet, as they worked side by side, a fragile bond began to form. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Richard and Isabel stood on the center's rooftop, surveying the bustling construction below. "You've done an incredible job here," Richard said, breaking the comfortable silence. "It's not just me." Isabel replied, "This wouldn't have been possible without the team and you." Richard smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "You know, Isabel, I never wanted to be the kind of man who let work consume him at the expense of family. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what truly mattered." Isabel turned to him, her expression guarded. "Why now? Why did you suddenly decide to change?" "Because meeting you made me realize how much I've missed," Richard admitted. "Seeing your strength, your resilience, it made me want to be better, for you, for your mother, and for myself." Isabel studied him, searching for any sign of insincerity, but all she saw was a man trying to make amends, however imperfectly. Back at home, Margaret watched these developments with quiet optimism. Her health had improved significantly, thanks to the specialized care Richard had arranged, and she often accompanied Isabel to the community center. "You know, darling," Margaret said one evening as they sat together, "for all his faults, I believe Richard truly wants to be part of your life now. He's trying in ways I never thought he would." "I know, Mama," Isabel admitted. "And I want to believe in him. But it's hard to let go of everything that's happened." Margaret smiled gently. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Isabel. It means giving yourself the freedom to move forward. Maybe this project is just the beginning, not only for him, but for you too." As the Rosewood Community Center neared completion, Isabel found herself stepping into a leadership role with increasing confidence. She organized outreach events, coordinated with local artists and educators, and even began designing uniforms for the staff and volunteers, her first step back into fashion design. Richard noticed the change in her. The guarded, weary woman he had first met was still there, but she was slowly being replaced by someone more open, more hopeful. One afternoon, as they reviewed plans for the grand opening ceremony, Richard handed Isabel an envelope. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing him suspiciously. "Just open it," he said with a grin. Inside was a deed to a small studio space in the city center, complete with funding for equipment and supplies. "I thought you might need a place to work on your designs," Richard explained. "Consider it a thank you for everything you've done here, and a chance to focus on your dreams." Isabel stared at the deed, her emotions swirling. She had spent so much of her life pushing aside her ambitions, convinced they were out of reach. Now, for the first time, the possibility felt real. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "Because I believe in you," Richard said simply, "and because I want you to have the opportunities I failed to give you before." That night, as Isabel worked late into the evening at the center, Margaret arrived with dinner in hand. Together, they sat in Isabel's office, sharing stories and dreams. "You know," Margaret said, "your father has surprised me." "I never thought I'd see this side of him." Isabel nodded, her thoughts distant. "He's trying, Mama. And for the first time, I think he might actually mean it." Margaret smiled. "That's all anyone can ask for, Isabel. Just take it one day at a time." And for the first time in years, Isabel felt a glimmer of hope. Not just for the community center or her rekindled dreams, but for the possibility of healing the fractured relationship with her father. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but maybe, just maybe, they were on the path to something better. For weeks, Amber had seethed in silence, her dismissal from the Harrington estate a bitter pill she couldn't swallow. She had spent years ingratiating herself with Richard, positioning herself as indispensable. The arrival of Isabel threatened everything: her influence, her status, and most importantly, the life of luxury she had cultivated at his expense. Amber wasn't one to admit defeat easily. She had played her cards well in the past, and now she had one final plan: a public scandal designed to ruin Richard Harrington's reputation and discredit Isabel. One evening, Isabel was at the Rosewood Community Center, reviewing final preparations for the grand opening. The center buzzed with activity as volunteers and staff worked late into the night. Isabel was beginning to feel a sense of pride in what they had accomplished. Just as she was about to head home, her phone buzzed. A private number. "Hello?" she answered. "Miss Isabel," a sharp, familiar voice sneered. "Or should I say, the long-lost daughter of Richard Harrington." Isabel froze. "Amber." Amber's laugh was cold and calculated. "Surprised to hear from me? Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about you. In fact, I have something special planned for you and dear old Daddy." "What do you want, Amber?" Isabel demanded, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her chest. "Justice," Amber replied, her tone dripping with mockery. "For the way I've been treated, you think you can swoop in and take what's mine? Think again. Tomorrow, everyone will know who you and Richard really are." Before Isabel could respond, the line went dead. The next morning, Isabel arrived at the community center to find the staff in disarray. A scandalous article had gone viral online, filled with lurid accusations against Richard. Amber had leaked fabricated stories claiming Richard had engaged in unethical business practices, exploited his employees, and used his wealth to silence dissenters. Worse, the article painted Isabel as a scheming opportunist who had manipulated her way into Richard's life for personal gain. Photos of Isabel at the center, taken without her knowledge, were splashed across the piece, framing her as complicit in Richard's alleged wrongdoings. "Isabel, what's going on?" one of the volunteers asked, holding up their phone. I don't know," Isabel stammered, the weight of the accusations pressing down on her. The grand opening, scheduled for the following day, was suddenly in jeopardy. Sponsors and community leaders began withdrawing their support, citing the negative publicity. At the Harrington estate, Richard read the article with a grim expression. His legal team scrambled to issue statements, but the damage had already been done. "We need to find Amber," Richard said. his voice like steel. She's the only one who could have done this. By midday, Richard's private investigator had tracked Amber to a small hotel outside the city. Richard wasted no time confronting her. Amber greeted him with feigned indifference, lounging in the hotel's shabby suite. "Richard," she purred, "what an unexpected visit." "Cut the act, Amber," Richard snapped. "I know you're behind this. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Amber smirked. "I've leveled the playing field. That's all. You thought you could cast me aside like trash and get away with it?" Richard stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "You've made a grave mistake. I have evidence of your lies. Every false claim you've ever made, every theft, every manipulation. If you don't retract your statements and issue a public apology, I'll make sure you face legal consequences." Amber's confidence faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "And what if I don't? Do you think your precious daughter will survive the fallout? She's already tainted by association with you." Richard's jaw tightened, his anger barely contained. "You underestimate her strength and mine. This is the end of the line for you, Amber." True to his word, Richard released irrefutable evidence exposing Amber's history of deceit. Bank records, witness testimonies, and footage from security cameras painted a damning picture of her schemes. The media quickly shifted their focus, denouncing Amber's credibility and retracting the false allegations. Meanwhile, Isabel faced the fallout with quiet resilience. Despite the public scrutiny, she continued working at the community center, determined not to let Amber's actions derail her efforts. One evening, Richard visited Isabel at the center. She was sitting in her office, reviewing plans for the grand opening, her shoulders tense. "You didn't have to come," Isabel said without looking up. "I wanted to," Richard replied, taking a seat across from her. "I'm sorry for what happened. Amber's actions were unforgivable, right? But the blame ultimately falls on me. If I hadn't allowed her into my life, none of this would have happened." Isabel finally looked at him, her expression weary but not unkind. "It's not your fault, Richard. Amber made her choices. What matters now is how we move forward." Richard nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. "You're stronger than I ever imagined, Isabel, and I promise I'll stand by you through this." The grand opening of the Rosewood Community Center proceeded as planned, albeit with heightened security. To everyone's surprise, the scandal only seemed to draw more attention to the center's mission. As Isabel addressed the crowd, her voice steady and confident, Richard watched with pride. For the first time, he saw not just the daughter he had failed, but the remarkable woman she had become. And though Amber's schemes had threatened to destroy everything, they had ultimately brought Richard and Isabel closer, solidifying the bond they were beginning to forge. After the turmoil caused by the scandal and Amber's machinations, the Rosewood Community Center became a symbol of resilience and hope. For Isabel, it was no longer just a project. It was a part of her identity, a beacon of everything she had fought for and overcome. But there was still more work to be done, and as the center thrived, so too did her relationship with Richard. Samantha had arrived early, as she often did now, to help with the last-minute preparations for the upcoming fashion showcase that would take place as part of the center's grand opening celebration. Over the past few months, she had begun to rediscover her long-lost passion for fashion design. Richard's gesture had been a catalyst. His gift of a studio space had opened doors she hadn't dared to dream of for years. What started as a tentative step toward reclaiming her creative voice had grown into something much larger. Samantha had designed a full collection of garments using local materials, inspired by her mother's love for floral patterns and nature. Each piece was a personal statement, a tribute to the woman who had supported her through thick and thin, and to the dreams that had been set aside for too long. As she put the final touches on the garments, she felt a thrill, a renewed sense of purpose that had eluded her for so long. The woman who had once been wary of Richard's intentions was now standing before the manifestation of his belief in her. Richard had made a point to visit the community center every day, and today was no exception. He had been following the progress of the fashion showcase closely, but what he hadn't anticipated was the depth of Samantha's work. When he walked into the studio and saw the designs laid out before him, he was momentarily speechless. They're beautiful, he said quietly, studying the vibrant fabrics, the intricate stitching, the unique patterns that reflected Samantha's boldness and resilience. Samantha smiled, though her expression was humble. Thank you. It's everything I've worked for. I never thought I'd have the chance to do this again. Richard stepped closer, his voice low. I've watched you struggle, Samantha, but I've also seen you grow. You're not the same person who walked into my life all those months ago. You're stronger, more confident, and you've made something extraordinary here. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no skepticism, no hesitation, just gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you, she said quietly, the weight of those words settling between them. Richard's heart swelled. You did it yourself. I only provided the means. You've given these pieces your heart. The night of the showcase arrived, and the Rosewood Community Center buzzed with anticipation. The guests, a mix of local dignitaries, community leaders, and donors, filled the grand hall, their conversations punctuated by the hum of excitement. The center was alive with color, art, and the promise of a brighter future. Samantha stood backstage, her heart racing as she watched the models prepare to walk the runway in her designs. This was more than a fashion show. It was a testament to everything she had endured and overcome, her fears, her doubts, and the oppressive weight of a life she had once thought was unchangeable. As the lights dimmed and the first model stepped onto the stage, Samantha's breath caught in her throat. The dresses, the ones she had poured every ounce of herself into, shimmered under the spotlight. The intricate floral patterns on the fabric told stories of nature's resilience. The delicate embroidery echoing the strength of the women who had shaped her. One by one, the models glided across the runway, and with each step, Samantha felt her connection to the world around her deepening. She wasn't just a laundress anymore. She wasn't just someone trying to survive. She was an artist, a creator, a woman who had found her voice in the most unlikely of places. Richard stood in the crowd, his gaze fixed on Samantha. He had always admired her tenacity, her ability to rise above the hardships that life had thrown at her. But tonight, he saw something else in her, a sense of peace, of self-assurance that he hadn't witnessed before. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to give someone the space to grow, to flourish on their own terms. And in that moment, he felt the weight of their shared journey. As the final model took their turn on the runway, the crowd erupted in applause. Samantha stood backstage, her eyes brimming with tears as she watched her creations come to life. The journey that had once seemed so impossible now felt like a dream realized. She had done it. She had transformed not just her circumstances, but herself. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Richard approached Samantha, who was standing by herself on the balcony, gazing out at the town below. That was incredible, Richard said, his voice full of admiration. Samantha turned to face him, her smile radiant. I still can't believe it. It feels surreal. Richard smiled back, a warmth in his eyes that spoke volumes. You should be proud of yourself. You've come so far, Samantha. Samantha nodded slowly, her thoughts turning inward. I never thought I'd get here. I never thought I'd have the chance to chase my dreams again. But you? She trailed off, uncertain of how to put her gratitude into words. Richard reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. You did all the work. I just gave you the chance. And I'm proud of you, Samantha. More than you'll ever know. For a moment, they stood in silence, the world outside them fading into the background. It was a quiet moment, but one filled with significance. The barriers between them had slowly but surely melted away. Samantha had found her purpose again, and Richard had found something he had never expected. A deep respect and admiration for the woman who had challenged him, changed him, and ultimately brought him closer to the person he had always wanted to be. As the days passed, the Rosewood Community Center became a symbol not just of community, but of the possibility of transformation. Samantha's designs were displayed in local boutiques, drawing attention from the fashion world, and her name began to be recognized for her talent, not her past. She had become more than just a survivor. She had become a creator, a woman who had turned the trials of her life into something beautiful. And as she looked ahead to the future, Samantha knew that this was just the beginning. The grand opening of the Rosewood Community Center had been an overwhelming success. far exceeding anyone's expectations. Richard, Samantha, and the entire team had worked tirelessly to bring the center to life. And now, as they looked around at the bustling activity, it was clear their efforts had paid off. The center had become a symbol of hope, not just for the community, but for the people who had poured their hearts into making it a reality. For Samantha, the center was no longer just a place to display her designs or share her talents. It had become her mission, her sanctuary. She had found a place where she could give back, a space where her creativity could flourish alongside the dreams of others. Each day, she walked through the halls, watching the transformation unfold. Children painting murals, seniors taking dance classes, local artisans teaching their crafts to eager students. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of community, the power of rebuilding. But beneath the surface of the success, there were whispers of challenges ahead. The Rosewood Project had just begun, and though its impact was already evident, there were still hurdles to overcome. Richard stood in his office at the community center, staring out the window at the town below. His thoughts were heavy, as he considered the long-term goals of the project. He had always wanted to do more for the community, but he realized that the path to lasting change would require more than just a successful opening. It would require sustained effort, investment, and vision. Samantha knocked lightly on the door before entering, a warm smile on her face. She had come to check on the progress of her designs, which had been displayed prominently in the center's new exhibition space. "You look deep in thought," Samantha said, her voice teasing but gentle. "Everything okay?" Richard turned to her, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "I've been thinking about the future of the center. We've made an impact, but we can't stop here. There's still so much more to do. We need to expand our reach, offer more services, create more opportunities, but that will require additional resources, both funding and support." Samantha nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I understand. It's a big undertaking, but I believe in this place. I've seen the difference it's already made for people, myself included." Richard smiled, touched by her words. "You've been an integral part of it, Samantha. Without your vision, none of this would have come together the way it has. But I need to know that we can sustain it, keep it growing, keep it evolving." Samantha's eyes lit up with determination. "I've been thinking about that too, and I think I've got an idea that could help. What if we expand the scope of the fashion program? We could partner with local businesses to showcase emerging designers, host workshops, and even start a mentorship program for young people interested in fashion. It could draw attention to the center, attract more donors, and create more opportunities for everyone involved." Richard raised an eyebrow, impressed by her initiative. "That's a fantastic idea, Samantha. We could create a whole new avenue for people to get involved, and it could generate revenue to fund other projects in the center. I love it." Over the next few weeks, Samantha and Richard worked together to develop the idea further. They reached out to local fashion boutiques, manufacturers, and designers, proposing a collaborative effort that would showcase the talent within the community while also supporting the center's expansion. They also began drafting plans for a mentorship program, which would pair experienced designers with aspiring young talents, offering guidance and education in everything from sketching to business strategy. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Local businesses, eager to support the Rosewood Project, agreed to sponsor events and donate materials. Designers were excited to have a platform to showcase their work, and many expressed interest in giving back to the community through workshops and mentorship. Samantha was energized by the project's growth, and she worked tirelessly to ensure that the fashion program would be a success. She spent hours organizing events, curating collections, and networking with industry professionals. As the program gained traction, she watched as her dream began to take shape, not just as a designer, but as a leader, a mentor, and a creator of opportunities for others. One afternoon, as Samantha was walking through the center, she encountered a young girl named Maya, who was participating in the mentorship program. Maya had always loved fashion, but she had struggled to find a way to pursue it in a town where opportunities were limited. Now, thanks to the Rosewood Project, Maya had a chance to learn from seasoned professionals, hone her skills, and work toward her own goals. "Maya, how are things going with the program?" Samantha asked, stopping to chat. Maya smiled brightly, her eyes sparkling with excitement. It's amazing. I've learned so much already. The workshops are great, and I'm working on my first design. I never thought I'd have this kind of opportunity. Samantha beamed with pride. I'm so glad to hear that. You're going to do great things, Maya. Just remember, it's not always going to be easy, but if you stay focused and keep pushing forward, you can achieve anything. Maya nodded, her confidence growing. Thanks, Samantha. I'm going to make you proud. As the months passed, the Rosewood Project continued to flourish. The fashion program became a centerpiece of the community center, drawing attention from local media and even national outlets. Samantha's collection was featured in a prominent fashion magazine, and soon she began receiving invitations to showcase her designs at regional fashion shows. What had started as a small idea had now become a movement, a testament to the power of perseverance, creativity, and community. But while the Rosewood Project was thriving, the work was far from over. The center was still growing, still expanding, and Richard and Samantha both knew that they had to continue pushing forward. They had built something beautiful, but there were many more dreams to be realized, more lives to be changed. One evening, as they sat together in the community center's newly opened cafe, Richard turned to Samantha with a thoughtful expression. I've been thinking about something, he said. This project, it's become so much more than I ever imagined, and I couldn't have done it without you. I know I've made mistakes in the past, but I want you to know that you've changed my life. You've made me see what really matters. This community, this place, it's more than just bricks and mortar. It's about people. It's about the connections we've made, the lives we've touched. Samantha looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Richard. You gave me a chance when I didn't think I had one. And now we're building something together, something that will last. Richard smiled, his eyes full of warmth. Yes, we are, and I'm just getting started. For the first time in a long time, Richard felt a sense of peace. The Rosewood Project was his legacy, and Samantha was the heart of it. Together, they had created something that would change not just their lives, but the lives of everyone in the community for generations to come. And as the sun set over the town, they both knew that the future was bright. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the Rosewood Project became more than just a community center. It was a living, breathing testament to the transformative power of resilience, creativity, and unity. Samantha's designs were displayed in boutiques across the region, and the mentorship program she had helped create was now a launching pad for young designers from all walks of life. Her name had become synonymous with innovation and opportunity, and her story, once one of struggle and hardship, was now a story of success, of dreams realized. But with all the progress came new challenges. As the project expanded, so did the responsibilities. Samantha, once a laundress with little more than hope to cling to, had become a cornerstone of the center. But even she could feel the weight of her newfound role. There were meetings to attend, plans to finalize, and a future to secure. Yet through it all, Richard remained by her side, not just as a partner in the project, but as someone who had come to mean more to her than she had ever imagined. Samantha had always been fiercely independent, but now, as she looked around at the growing success of the Rosewood Project, she knew that she could not have achieved this alone. Richard had not just provided the resources. He had given her the space to grow, to shine, and to find her own voice. He had believed in her when she had doubted herself, and that belief had propelled her to heights she had never thought possible. One evening, as they sat in the quiet of the community center's main hall, watching the last of the day's visitors leave, Richard turned to Samantha, his expression thoughtful. I've been thinking, he began, his voice quiet but steady, about the future, about us. Samantha raised an eyebrow, her heart skipping a beat. What do you mean? Richard took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. I know we've both been focused on the project, on everything we've built here, but I think it's time to focus on something else, something more personal. I can't help but wonder, what would it be like if we took the next step, if we stopped holding back and embraced what's between us? Samantha felt a rush of emotions, surprise, uncertainty, but also an overwhelming sense of something deeper. She had always kept her feelings carefully guarded, not just because of her past, but because she feared vulnerability. But looking at Richard now, she realized that the man who had been her partner in this journey had also become someone who had earned her trust in a way no one else ever had. "I think we've both been running from this," Samantha said, her voice soft but steady. "But maybe it's time we stopped. Time to see where this could go." Richard smiled, the tension between them melting away as his hand reached for hers. "I don't want to run anymore, Samantha. I've watched you grow, I've watched you change, and I've realized that the person I've become in your presence is someone better. And I want to be there for you in every way." Samantha felt her heart swell with a warmth she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. "I don't know where this will take us, but I'm willing to try. Together." The weeks that followed were filled with new beginnings. Samantha and Richard, once partners in a project, were now partners in life. Their relationship grew stronger each day, grounded in the same trust and respect that had built the Rosewood Project. They spent more time together outside of work, finding joy in the simple moments: walks through the town, shared dinners, quiet conversations that stretched into the night. As they continued to expand the Rosewood Project, Samantha's role evolved even further. She was no longer just a designer. She was a leader, a mentor, and a driving force behind the center's vision. Her work had earned the respect of her peers, and her influence was felt in every corner of the town. But for all the outward success, Samantha never forgot the lessons she had learned along the way: the importance of community, of family, and of embracing vulnerability. The journey from laundress to leader had not been easy, but it had been hers, every step of the way. One day, Richard approached Samantha with a new idea. He had been working on a proposal for a scholarship program, one that would allow young people from underprivileged backgrounds to attend fashion design schools. It was a bold vision, one that would carry the Rosewood Project's legacy forward for generations to come. "I want to create a lasting impact," Richard said, his eyes alight with passion. "We've done so much here, but I think we can do more. A scholarship program would give young people the same opportunity I gave you, the opportunity to chase their dreams." Samantha smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I think that's an amazing idea, Richard. I've seen firsthand how much talent is out there, waiting for a chance. This could change lives." Together, they worked tirelessly to make the scholarship program a reality, reaching out to sponsors and industry professionals who were eager to be a part of something meaningful. The response was overwhelming, and soon the Rosewood Scholarship Fund was established, providing a gateway to education and opportunity for the next generation of designers. Months later, as they stood in front of a group of scholarship recipients, Richard and Samantha shared a quiet moment of reflection. The young designers, full of hope and ambition, looked to them for guidance. In their eyes, Samantha saw the same spark that had once driven her, an unwavering belief that anything was possible. "Thank you for believing in us," one of the recipients said, her voice filled with gratitude. Samantha smiled, her heart full. "You're the future. We're just here to help you get started. The rest is up to you." As the years passed, the Rosewood Project continued to grow, its impact expanding beyond the borders of the town. Samantha's designs were now recognized on a national level, and the scholarship program had helped countless young people achieve their dreams. The community center had become a thriving hub of creativity, where people from all walks of life came together to learn, create, and grow. But for Samantha and Richard, the greatest reward was the life they had built together. They had faced challenges, overcome obstacles, and grown stronger in the process. Their love was not just a part of their personal story. It was woven into the fabric of the Rosewood Project, a testament to the power of second chances, of growth, and of the enduring strength of the human spirit. And as they looked ahead to the future, hand in hand, they knew that this was only the beginning. There was so much more to do, so many more lives to touch, so many more dreams to realize. But no matter where the journey took them, they would face it together, with love, with hope, and with the unshakable belief that anything was possible. And so, the story of the Rosewood Project and of Samantha and Richard continued. A story of transformation, of community, and of love that defied all odds. It was a new chapter, one that would inspire generations to come, proving that with vision, dedication, and heart, anything could be achieved. The end was just the beginning. As the years unfolded, the Rosewood Project continued to thrive, evolving into a beacon of hope, creativity, and opportunity. The community center, once a dream, had become a lasting legacy. Its influence felt far beyond the town's borders. Samantha's journey from laundress to leader had become a story of inspiration, one that resonated with anyone who believed in second chances and the power of hard work. Richard and Samantha, now partners in both life and mission, looked out over the thriving center, their hearts full of pride and gratitude. They had built something together, something that not only changed their own lives, but also transformed the lives of countless others. The scholarship program, the fashion mentorship, the countless community events, they were all pieces of a greater puzzle, a puzzle that had started with a simple idea and had grown into something magnificent. They had proven that even the most unlikely beginnings could lead to extraordinary outcomes. But the story didn't end there. For Samantha and Richard, the future was still unwritten, filled with possibilities and dreams waiting to be realized. They had created a foundation, but the work was far from over. With every new person they helped, every life they touched, they knew the Rosewood Project would continue to grow, just as they would, together. The end of one chapter was only the beginning of another. And as long as they had each other, they knew the story of the Rosewood Project, and their own journey would never truly end. It would live on in the hearts of everyone it touched as a testament to the power of vision, love, and the belief that anything is possible. The story, after all, was just beginning. Thank you so much for following this journey and listening to the entire story. We truly appreciate your time and attention. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world and helps us bring more stories like this to life. Feel free to leave a comment and let us know what you thought. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, take care and stay inspired.